Hey, this is Gwen coming to you from my little studio here in Utah, and I have a project video tutorial that I wanted to share with you today that uses embossing powder in mixed media. And this is based on a project that I had done last year. It was a video that I did as part of a free workshop that was given by Natalie Kalbach as a celebration for the release of her book. And this was an artful adventure. It was based on a prompt. My prompt was crack. And I used that to create this piece of mixed media artwork, and this is a sample that I had made. And I'm going to recreate this today. I have been waiting to reshoot this video using the new embossing powders, the baked texture powders that were released from Seth Apter and Emerald Creek. And I want to show you how I do this technique with acrylic latex caulking and embossing powder and acrylic inks and a few other little techniques, and I think this is going to be a lot of fun. So I'm going to just move the camera over to my desk and we'll get started. So here we are. I've got the piece again. Here's the sample of what I'm going to be doing. And I'm just starting out with, this is just a 6x6 cradled panel, birch. And I'm going to start by just gessoing it. I've got some gray gesso here from Liquitex, and I'm just going to get some of that on the panel here. All right, and that is all gessoed. I'm going to go ahead and set that aside. And then while the gesso is drying, I'll show you, this was the prompt. We took pictures. The idea was to go around the neighborhood and take an artful stroll and to look at things that you saw that might inspire you in your artwork. And I was specifically looking for cracks. And when I first took this prompt, I was thinking cracks in the wall, cracks in the sidewalk. And then I was walking out to my car from work one afternoon, and I looked down at the pavement, the asphalt parking lot, and I noticed that these cracks that, you know, they run through every parking lot that you've ever been in, but I was really in that mindset, and so I started to think about it, and I thought, oh wow, that's my crack. That's exactly what I want to take as my inspiration. And I really loved not just the fact that it was cracked, but all of the texture all around it. And you can see just in this photo how much texture there was on the surface. And then I love the idea of having this crack be filled, this tar. And as you look into it, you can see little bright colorful specks. It was early spring, and so there were bits of pollen and blossoms and things that had fallen down into the cracks. And I was really feeling inspired by that. And so I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. So this was the basis of the idea that I had for the project that we're going to create. Okay, so now that the background is dry, I want to go ahead and get to the texture part of it and really put down kind of this foundation for the rest of the things that we're going to do. So I'm going to use, this is Alex Fast Dry. This is DAP, basically. It's a caulking. You use it in your bathrooms, your kitchen, that kind of thing. I learned about this taking classes with Michael Demeng, and it's really a very cool thing. And what I'm going to do is just take this, and then I like these little silicone spatula things from Princeton, these Catalyst blades. I think that they are really helpful for working with this kind of thing because nothing's going to stick to the surface of this, and I'm not going to have to worry about cleaning it out of my brushes, which I really would not want to do. So I'm just going to put a whole bunch of this on here, and I will probably need some more, but we'll start with that for now. And then what I'm going to do is just take this blade and use it to spread this caulking and make some different textures in it. And just get it around there, spread it around. And then once you start to get this across the entire surface of the panel, that's when you can start to change the movement of how you're using the tool in order to get some different textures. And you don't have to use this DAP Alex Plush. You can use a molding paste, different texture pastes, that kind of thing. Anything that is going to give you some texture that's going to be firm and solid when it's done. So it doesn't have to be that particular product, but something similar to that is probably what I would use in the background. So you can see I'm now starting to just turn this in different ways and try holding it in different positions. And that will give you different texture on the background. And I'm leaving some of the background to show through. That's why I used the colored gesso, so that I would have a little bit of that color come through in the background. And you can just try different things, see what you like, move it around, and just experiment and have fun. I'm going to just keep going with this until I get the background the way that I want it, and then we'll go to the next step. I'm actually going to add a little more, even though that's covered. because I would like to get some areas that have a little bit more varying thickness. I'm going to add a little bit more on top, especially because what I'm going to do in the next step is carve through it a little bit and start to create some channels that are going to give it that crack and then have a place to fill that crack. Go ahead and clean this, finish cleaning this off, get that all clean and set aside, and then I'm going to pull out a couple of different tools. And I have some palette knives and some of these silicone blades and tips. And what I want to do is go ahead and start carving those channels that I had mentioned. And you can see here in the original that that is what I've done there, and I'm going to show you how we make those. And it's almost kind of a geological sort of look to it, which I really like, and that's kind of what I was going for. So I'm just going to pick a tool and just start, while this is still wet, and just start to go through and pull it off. And the tool that you choose could be different depending on the look that you want, and also the angle of the tool is going to be different. Now this one is giving me a little bit of a lip, which you may or may not want, and you can tamp that down, leave it whatever you want. I am actually going to try, let's try this one, because this should give me a nice flat. And just try some different things. I was thinking of something along the lines of riverbeds or a canyon or just some kind of naturally inspired set of channels of some kind here. And get branches off of it and change up the shapes. We want variety. So this is going to be very thin. And you could really, I mean, you can do whatever shape you want in here. You could even just come in here. I've been drawn to circles in my work for as long as I can remember. It's always been a theme for me. So that is probably this one. I wish I had done this to begin with, actually, but so go ahead and pull off anything here that you don't want. You can work it back into the piece. You could just tamp it down. And I'm really loving this circle, actually, and wish this was on the piece that I was going to finish with. But since this needs time to dry, I'm going to go ahead and set this aside. And like I said, this will dry in a couple of hours, depending on where you live and what particular medium you've used to do the background. But I'm going to go ahead and set that aside. And then, through the magic of video, I have another one, sadly without a circle. But I've got all kinds of fantastic little channels here that are ready for me to take the next step. And the next thing that I want to do is to go ahead and start to build up some of this fantastic texture and color along the edge. And this has all been done with embossing powder. And this was Emerald Creek embossing powder, but I'm going to go ahead and use that and then use some of this baked texture powder, because as soon as I saw this rocky road, I knew that I wanted to use it for this technique because it's going to be absolutely fabulous. So that's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to get out a little tray for my embossing powder. And what I want here is embossing ink. And I'm just going to take the re-inker for an embossing pad. You could also use a Versamark. If you really wanted to, you could even just use a re-inker for a pigment pad. The important thing is that you've got the stickiness of this, it's more of a glue than an ink. And so we're going to go ahead and take this. This is a very old one, you can tell by the label. The newer ones actually look like that. I'm going to go ahead and just take the old one, and I just use my hands. You can use, you know, a brush or a silicone brush, whatever you want for this. I feel like I get more control on this particular technique doing it this way. So you can see, and I'm going to scoot in a little bit so that you can see what I'm doing. You can see that I'm just dabbing this ink along the edges. And using your finger is great for this because it does really help you to get into the cracks that are left in this this background here. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep doing this, and we'll speed this up, and then I'll come back when we're ready to emboss. Okay, I think I've got it everywhere, and that's pretty good to start. One of the benefits of using your fingers is that you can kind of feather out along the edges here, because on this very outside portion, I don't want a hard line. I want this to be kind of faded out a little bit. So I'm going to feather out the ink. And I've probably missed a few spots here, and that's okay because I'm going to be able to go back later. The next thing I'm going to do is get my embossing powder out. And I've got a tray here. You can also just use a folded piece of paper. I just happen to have a tray. And so I'm just going to go ahead and get this on here. Give it a nice good coating and tap it off. I can see where I'm missing a little bit of ink, and that's okay. I can go back and add that later. And then let's go ahead and heat this stuff. I really just love the surface and the texture of this powder. I think it looks so cool. So we've got that done, and now you see I've got spots left on here. And you can also see this is a very, although it's rough, you can hear that because of the inclusions that are in the powder. They're like little rocks that are in it. That's really, really a lovely texture. But the surface itself is nice and smooth and glossy, and we want to change that a little bit. One of my absolute favorite things to do with embossing powder is to use acrylic mediums with it and make it bubble, and that gives you a completely different kind of texture and appearance that really is kind of a unique thing to using embossing powder with mixed media. The next thing I'm going to do is grab, this is polymer medium that I keep in this little needle tip bottle. Golden has changed the name. They call it gloss medium now, and Liquitex, I believe, calls it pouring medium. But I put it in here, and it's got this nice little tip on it, which gives me the ability to be a little bit more detailed. And since this is a particularly fluid medium, that just means that I can come in here and go ahead and get this in there where I want it. My tray back out, go back in, and I do tend to pour quite a bit when I'm doing this. I just like to make sure I have good coverage. Anything extra goes back into the jar anyway, so it all works. Let's go back in and heat some more. This is where it starts to get really fun. You can use this with pretty much any wet acrylic medium. I would just make sure, I did start one time to use embossing powder, and as I was heating it, I had been using it with a medium, and I started to think, I think this is flammable. And so I ever since then, I fortunately did not catch anything on fire, but I've had to remind myself to check and make sure that whatever I'm using is not flammable. Also, we are going to be burning and bubbling a plastic, so you may want to cover your nose, use a respirator or something, especially if you're sensitive, for this part of it, because it does release some fumes, and I feel like they're probably not good for you. So I do try to cover my nose and make sure that I can breathe clean air while I'm doing this. All right, let's go. Now you see what I mean about the texture on that? I mean, that is phenomenal. It's still a little bit wet, so it's going to peel back if you push too hard on it, but I just love that so much, I can't even tell you. So the next thing I'm going to do is get out my embossing pad, and I'm going to grab my Ancient Amber, and you can see how much I love this particular one. There's not a whole lot left in here. So I'm going to take the pad and just run it along the top. I don't want to get in and really dig in a whole lot. I definitely don't want to get into these channels here because I'm going to do something else with those. But I just want to grab the peaks of the part that I've embossed. Okay. So we'll go through this process again. And it may stick a little bit to some of it because it's still warm and I'm impatient. fantastic. And if you have a little bit more than you want, I just grab a dry bristle brush and come in here and fleck a little bit of it off. And let's go ahead and ink. Doesn't that look fantastic? I really love the Ancient Amber on top of Rocky Road. The other one that is really good on top of this is a little bit of Chunky Rust, and you could even then put some patina oxide on top of that, and that looks really wonderful too. So the next thing I want to do is come in here and take care of these channels and do a little something fun with that. So what I'm going to do for those is I love these Versamark pens. It's the exact same ink that's in the Versamark pad, but you get it in a pen, and it has a little bullet tip and a brush tip. And you can see that I've abused mine pretty badly. I have multiples of these because I go through them like this and I just really rip them up. And this technique will rip them up, but it doesn't actually make them unusable. It just really makes the tips of your pen look terrible, as you can see here. But it still works great. There's still a lot of ink in it. And I will periodically come in here and just trim them a little bit if they're getting too fuzzy and I want to be able to contain where they're going. But what I'm going to do is now come in and just fill in only these channels and then up along the sides of it. And this, like embossing ink, is a slower drying ink, which is fantastic because that gives you the time to come in here and do this and not have it dry as you go, which could be a problem with some of the other inks. So what I'm going to do on this part is I'm going to take one of Emerald Creek's regular embossing powders. This is the Allure powder. This is charcoal, one of my favorites. And I'm just going to now go ahead and do the same thing. And we're ready to heat this part. And I've got some spots here that need a little bit of coverage, so I'm just going to add a little bit as I'm heating, and it'll stick to it without any more of the ink. And you know what? I've decided that while I'm at it right now, I am going to add a little bit of the green patina. And I'm just going to use that same technique. Heat, and then put a pinch down and just let it melt right in. It's very subtle, but I really love how that looks. So the next thing I'm going to do is move on to the acrylic inks. So what I want to do, and I'm just going to get a paintbrush here, the right size. And this is really easy. And I'm just going to start to drop just a little bit of color. And then I want to wet my brush because I want it to be a little bit more of a wash, at least to start. And I've got a wet baby wipe here so that I can come in and take some of the color back out if I want to, because I don't want to completely saturate the entire thing with turquoise right off the bat. Unless you really want the entire thing to be turquoise and you're totally happy with that, then go for it, which, you know, a lot of times that's what it's turquoise. And then I'm going to have it heavier in some places, because what's going to happen is with this medium that's on the board, it's absorbent, and so in places where I've put the paint down a little bit heavier, it's going to be darker. Let's go ahead and just dab a little bit into the roughness of the embossing powder here and just carry a little bit of the color through into the center section, and I think that'll be nice. Let's go ahead and bring in just a touch of Payne's Gray, which is not really gray. Ooh, not really anything in my dropper either. I just want to add a little bit of darkness, especially around the edges. And then I think I'm going to use a little bit of this olive green because I want to echo the green a little bit from the patina. Even though they're not the same shade, it will help to be able to carry that through the composition here. You could also try this with alcohol inks, and those would also seep and absorb really nicely into this kind of medium on the background, and you could get some slightly different effects that I think would also be very, very cool with this technique. Okay, now I want to make sure that my brush is really clean, and I want to make sure that the inks are very dry, because I'm going to go ahead and change colorways, and I don't want this to turn into mud. So I'm going to stop for just a second and dry this, and then I'll be back. Okay, we're pretty dry. So now I want to come back in, and I want to echo the metallic. I've got a little bit of this iridescent bronze, and I want just a touch of this. But usually when I'm doing anything that's got a bit of a rusty color to it, I like to have some metallic in my base. Just as a nod to the fact that it's metal that has been rusted in the first place. And now I'm going to go ahead and use this rusted color. Now these are transparent, so I'm getting a little bit of brown anyway as the colors are layering over each other, and that's okay because I like that, how that's looking. But I want just a little bit more contrast, so do I want to go red earth or poppy? I don't think I want quite that much contrast. As lovely and colorful as that is, it's a little bit too much, and now it's contrasting, or it's taking over the piece, and I do want the focus to be on the center section. So the next thing I'm going to do is pull out this dirty glaze, and this is a glaze that I make with micaceous iron oxide, Van Dyke brown, and interference gold mixed with gloss medium. So I'm just going to bring out my palette. Cover this whole section. There we can see that that glaze has knocked that back quite a bit, and that's one of the great things about using a glaze. I did not do one in the original piece because it didn't come forward and compete so much, but in this one it was fighting it a little bit too much. So just let that sit there, and then I'm going to kind of take a little bit of it back. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and stop and dry the glaze, and then I want to come back through with a little bit more embossing powder. Okay, this is dry, and then on top of that, what I've also done is I've taken, this is just an embossing, it's a pouncing bag, it's got some powder in it that you can put down to make sure that the embossing powder only sticks where you want it to. So I've powdered the sides here because I don't want it to stick there unless I put ink there particular. And you can see that, you can see the powder on here, and then I'll be able to wipe it off when I'm done. But for now, I want that like that. So I'm going to bring my Rocky Road back out and get my Versamark pen. And I want to come in here and reintroduce some more black on top of what has already been done. And I can do a little bit of Versamark. I could also just come in here with my polymer medium, whichever you want, whatever look you're trying to achieve. And I'm just going to run my fingers over here and pick up the high points so that I don't get it back down into that gold, but that I am able to reintroduce a little bit more and bring back some contrast. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, is that you can layer embossing powders, and there's a lot that you can do with it where you can treat it much the same way that you would paint and create lots and lots of layers of texture and color and allow them to blend together. It's a little bit different in how they'll blend, but you can get some really cool effects with this, and you can definitely layer it. And so we're going to add our layer right here. You can tell already that I'm going to want a little bit more right around here. Alright, I think that looks pretty good. And I think maybe we need just a little bit of rust. So for this one, I'm just going to use my Versamark pen, and I'm just going to kind of come along the top and just a little tiny bit. And I want to get some of that rust in there to melt down into the previous layers. And for those of you who are not big embossers from the days of old, you can also use your pouncing pad inside your tray. Mine is overdue to be redone. And then once you've done that, it's good for quite a while before you need to do that again, and it'll help the powder come out of your tray much easier. You can see what I was doing as I went was to take little pinches of both the rust and the rocky road and put them on top as I was heating so that I could get more color. And some of it I was not melting all of the way so that it would sit a little bit more on the top, especially the rust. So there we have it. So you can see that I was just adding little bits of the chunky rust and the rocky road as I went to kind of keep building up those layers and adding color. And you can keep going and going with this, and I have. And you just keep doing it until you get it to a point where you really, really like what you see. And I really like what I see right here. You've got some of these that are a little bit not totally baked, which I liked the texture that you get on that. And then what I want is for this embossing powder to completely dry and cool down. And then I'll go back in with a baby wipe, and I'm going to wipe the powder off of there. But if I were to go in right now, it would lift some of this up because this is still hot, and so it can peel off the surface. So I'm going to let that cool, and then we'll come back and finish. So I went ahead and dried the, let this cool, and then I started to go back in and add a little bit more of the green, and I want to add a little bit more of the turquoise as well, because I do really love the contrast. So I'm going to add just a little bit more of the turquoise and blend that out. Dab some of that off. I don't want it too much over the red because this one's translucent and it'll turn brown, but over the green, it's going to look quite nice. And then the finishing touch here is I want to do a few things. I want to bring that Payne's gray back out because I've lost some of that darkness along the edge, and I do want to have that framing effect. And you can see how that really makes a difference to have that darkness along the edge. That's something that I really like to make sure that I do on pretty much anything that I'm working on, art journal pages, panels. See that that's already made a difference there in how this looks. And then the last thing is that I have this Renaissance Treasure Gold. This is a wax gilt from Paper Artsy. And this is probably not how you're supposed to use it, but this is how I use it. I just put a little bit on my finger, and I want to capture the high points here. And you can see, zoom in a little bit so that you can kind of see what that looks like. How it just picks up the peaks of all of that really rough textured embossing that we've done here. And then I'm going to bring it out also and pick up some of the texture from that dap that's in the bottom layer. Just a little bit. I don't want to go crazy with it, because you could see how if you did too much of this, it would just take over the whole thing. You want it to be just an accent. It's like finishing salt on a fancy meal. One of the other things that I really like to do is carry colors throughout. And so just the very slightest, you can see I've barely got any on my finger at all. Maybe not even enough. Just little teeny tiny hints of some of this color popping through in the center so that I can create some continuity. And it doesn't really even need to be enough to be visible, just so that subconsciously you pick up on the fact that these things connect. And I think that'll do it. Okay, well that's it for this little video tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. We've got my original one and then this new one. I just need to finish up the edges and it will be ready to go. I really like how you have the same technique and they turn out really quite different with the different color palettes. And then in the time that it took to do that one, this one is also dry. And so I think I'm going to jump right in now and finish this one and then I'll have 3. So I've got a lot more tutorials and posts and projects coming with embossing powder in the next couple of weeks. Maybe even videos if you like this one, we will see. And if you do something like this at home, I would really love to see how it turned out. So thanks for joining me today and I hope you enjoyed it.